Hello, listeners. Welcome to the inaugural episode of Geopolitical Cousins. I assume that Marko and I will do our own separate intro and have it all beautiful and lined up. But we don't want to make perfection the enemy of the good. We thought we wanted to get our first episode out. We're going to try and do this cadence weekly. We'll probably set up an email address for the podcast. But in the meantime, if you want to talk to us about anything you heard here, or if you want to respond to our query about geopolitical sports moments, you can email me at jacob@jacobshapiro.com, and I will make sure that Marko sees it. Otherwise, we're really excited to have you along for this new podcast adventure. Cheers and see you out there. All right, the two cousins officially doing business together on the podcast. Two exhausted cousins. Both Marko and I have been traveling. As you can imagine, we're getting questions nonstop. What a time to be alive, Marko, to have a geopolitical cousin, to start a geopolitical podcast. Here we are.
I'm shocked that not more people have done this. Focused on geopolitics, I mean. There isn't really. And I think that we're filling a very important space in this, in that we are Muppets, first and foremost, and we are going to have an irreverent podcast about geopolitics. But do you like my getup?
I do.
I try to be extra broy, extra podcasty just for this.
Well,
one.
It's nice. If you are just listening and you can't see the video, Marko now has a nice microphone. He has nice headphones. It's nice for me because I don't have to constantly hear your mic like scraping against your shirt or like all the sound in the background and things like that. It's a real pleasure to hear you in high definition. So I'm sure it's good for the listeners as well.
I have no idea what I sound like, but I hope I sound as silky and smoothie as Jacob Shapiro.
Well, I mean, you'd need to lower the timbre of your voice just a little bit to do that, but you certainly sound like you could be on NPR. I mean, I'm particularly good right now because I've had a cold for like 4 frickin' weeks at this point, so like it just keeps on getting lower and deeper. The flip side is I have to mute anytime I'm clearing my throat so that you don't hear the mucus that's flowing through my brain. But right now, it sounds pretty good. So.
Awesome. Well, yeah. So like, I'm very excited that we've decided to do this, and I think maybe it's a good opening to explain to those who are going to listen to this who this is for. I think like both of us have a day job. Both of us have a 9 to 5, if you will, which is increasingly due to travel and the Trump washing machine cycle. He's set this thing at high. So it's very intense. But yeah, so like we both have jobs, basically in finance. We're both essentially strategists for investors. And so for those of you who have just like randomly clicked on this podcast and are like, who are these two guys? We are not policymakers. We are not journalists. And for the most part, at least I can speak for myself, I'm an analyst, so I'm watching the world burn and I'm going to write an 800-page note to my clients who are mostly hedge funds, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, stuff like that. So the reason I say this at the top is to also say that we're not going to talk about the markets that much on this podcast because then we can't sell our research.
Yeah, although I think it's an important point to make, because you said we're not policymakers, we're not journalists, we're also not public intellectuals. Like we're not here hawking our next book or our next take.
Whoa, hold on a second. What?
No, we're not.
As I slowly slide and reveal the book.
Yes, but you wrote Geopolitical Alpha to extend your career in the places where you actually do things, not because you are writing the next book. Like you're not pushing out a book every other single year with a new take like some of the others are. And like this podcast, like
That's
you're not
true.
paying money for this podcast right now at this point. Like it's not like that's not what's sort of driving us. The market gives us some kind of discipline. So even if we're not going to talk about the markets directly, you should know that the things that are percolating in our minds, it's not because like we're working on something or because we want some policy to happen. It's because we probably have a client or an investor who like told us to look at that particular thing.
Now, listen, a lot of listeners who are not used to that kind of analysis might scoff at that, like, oh, well, these guys are biased. But actually, in a way, if you're focused, as you say, if the market disciplines you, then you are actually, obviously you're biased because you're trying, your bias is trying to forecast the future as well as you can so you can get the markets right. But we're not trying to cheerlead a particular outcome or a particular policy, as you say, Jacob. And I think that's important. That is a weird way to attack geopolitics and politics. And most podcasts out there don't attack it from that perspective. I mean, it's a very analytical and, like, I don't really care who wins. I just want to know where the 10-year yield is going, kind of a thing. So that anchors us, I think, really well. And I think it's for those of you who are listening to this podcast, I think oftentimes you're going to be extremely angry at us and extremely like in favor of what we say at the same time. And I think there's very few podcasts out there that are going to be like that because of how politicized everything is.
Well, and we're specifically looking for listeners who are okay with that. I mean, every presentation I give or when I'm working with a client, if you agree with everything I say, tell me, because I'm doing my job incorrectly. Like, you are not supposed to agree with me in everything I say. My job is to actually give you the things that you disagree with so you can either deepen your point of view or so you can come back and tell me how wrong I am. Like, I'm doing a bad job, and you would probably say this too, that you're doing a bad job if you agree with 100% of the things out of our mouths. That's not...
I don't know. My job is to convince my listeners. So I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Okay, so a couple of things I do want to say. First of all, we are Muppets. I just want to like reiterate that. I think the cover art for our podcast is the two old Muppet guys, but with our faces on it. Why do I say this? I say this because we don't take ourselves too seriously. Like, if we make a call wrong, we're going to make calls wrong. Like, I just want everyone to know this. We're not on this podcast. We are not trying to get the markets right. So don't look out for stock dips. But the other issue is also we are going to get things wrong. And I think one of the problems in this political space is that too often people get way too serious about their frameworks or methodologies. We're going to try our best, but things are going to go wrong. And I think both of you and I have made some extraordinarily incorrect forecasts, and that's just the way it is. Kobe Bryant had a sub 50% shooting field goal percentage in his career. By game 7 comes along and he misses 20 shots. You still want him taking a shot from the mid-range. That's just the way it is.
You miss,
so there's
you
a
miss
reason
100% of the shots you don't take, Mark.
Yeah, so basically I both compared myself to a Muppet and Kobe in the same breath. So there you go. That's what you are going to, that's what you're in for. Stretched analogies that are extremely hyperbolic in nature. So if you don't like them, you should probably tune out. The second is TAM. What's our addressable market here? And what I'm going to say here is that it's wide. My research is probably read by 0.7% of, like out of 100 random people you pick up, like less than one of them is going to really enjoy my written research. It's focused for the investment professionals. This one, we're going to widen it out. So we're looking to widen our TAM, like who's actually our addressable market. And so I always think of sort of like, what would my mom want to listen to? What would she want to read? I don't think she wants to read a piece about Russian-Ukrainian conflict that concludes with a investment recommendation in European defense stocks in the US 10-year treasury. Like those are not things that my mom wants to listen to. So we're trying to really appeal here to a very broad audience. I want my mom to listen to this podcast. And there's a great scene, by the way, in White Lotus, 3rd season. Good show. I think you know what I'm talking about, Jacob, where the 3 sort of middle-aged girls that are out, on a vacation, get into a fight because I think one of them voted for Trump, right? Yeah, that gets revealed in the scene. And so what I want to say here is I don't care which side you're on, but you're going to get some ammo for those arguments. So next time you get into an argument with your friends because you voted for Trump or you didn't, whatever the case is, hopefully we're going to provide you with the ammunition to make yourself sound smarter. Right? I mean, is that just kind of a general sense of what we're going to try to do here?
Exactly.
I mean, everybody, I think that's like, this is a very broad audience. We're not trying to be, we're not trying to be very narrow. The final one is we're going to be irreverent. And I want to this is the parental advisory label right now. I want to just say straight up, we're going to make fun of things that most people don't make fun of. We're going to make light, not fun, but we're going to make light of a lot of very deeply personally held issues for a lot of people. So, that's just something to keep in mind. I think both you and I have a very irreverent personality. And so if that's going to rub you the wrong way, because we're going to make fun of someone you really deeply love or a particular thesis, then you should probably not listen to this. But we're not going to get too serious on this podcast. We're not going to turn on the TikTok camera quite often and look at it with a stern look in our eyes and send a message to some politician. So Yeah.
No, I think you and I are both iconoclasts, and I think that you and I mean, not just like, the down to earth way to say it is we're not going to take ourselves too seriously. We're going to bring humor to things. It's about a deep and meaningful appreciation of irony, because things don't happen the way you expect they're going to happen, and things are humorous when you think about them in the broad scope of human history. It's hard to do that with politics, because politics is literally the way that human beings come together to structure their societies in a way that is just and true. So like, these are supposed to be deeply held conversations, but I don't know how to have those conversations without approaching it with some sense of humor. So I'm with you 100% of the way there. I said we weren't going to be public intellectuals, and look at me over intellectualizing what you just said. So there you go.
I think our background probably explains why we're like that, but we don't have to get into that, because then we're just doing a podcast about ourselves. So let's get into what we're going to do. Let's dive right into
let's
it.
get right
into it. I mean, what do you have for us? What do you have for us,
I have
Jacob?
a bunch of
What's
things
your
for
menu?
us today, but I wanted to start in sort of a slightly strange place that I didn't prepare you for, because this happened
Nice.
just yesterday, and this is going to be really wonky, but I think it actually is meaningful and says some things. I don't know if you saw this. The Pentagon decided to disestablish the Office of Net Assessment yesterday. Said they are going to split it all up and rebuild it in alignment with the department's strategic priorities, and all the other personnel will be reassigned to mission critical roles. I don't know about you, Marco. Like, this really hit home to me, because you and I probably don't have careers if not for the Office of Net Assessment, because Andrew Marshall, the guy who set it up, was the guy who sort of trained George Friedman, who's the guy who sort of trained us. It's also this like tradition of geopolitical analysis. Like, it all comes back sort of to the Office of Net Assessment, and the U.S. government just said, nah, like, it's done. We're gonna reassign people with it. I don't know if you have a reaction to that. For me, I was kind of like, wow, that's interesting. And two, cool. Like, you're making the vacuum for the analysis we do even bigger, because now the US government's not going to have this kind of analysis within it, which is one theme I'm worried about with the US government. Like, if you're going to cut all of these different agencies and things like that, yeah, you're going to trim fat. Maybe you'll make things more efficient. You're also going to get rid of a lot of the human capital and knowledge that's accrued in the government in general, and will make sort of government policy that much more disjointed. So I wanted to give you a chance to riff on that before we get into the things that everybody really wants us to talk about.
Jacob, turn the TikTok camera on.
Oh, okay. Did you hear that?
I just said it. Yeah, like, where's our producer? I just said we wouldn't do that. Yeah, this listen, one of the reasons that so first of all, I'm very happy with my job. I just want to say that. I love BCA research. Hashtag, what's up? Whoever pays my check, thank you. I love working in finance. I love working for investors. I don't want a social media profile. I don't want to be on a podcast. But one of the reasons that I honestly want to do this, Jacob, is that a lot of normal human beings, like just normal people who have heard me on your podcast, The Jacob Shapiro Show, come to me and are like, oh my God, like, thank you for explaining what's going on. And so one of the reasons that I actually kind of have a normative moral, like, I guess I'm not as cold a nihilist as I pretend to be, is all these people learning about geopolitics from YouTube clips, for God's sakes. YouTube clips. And there's a lot of YouTube clip foreign policy going on right now. There's a lot of it, like, for example, this notion the U.S. is going to steal Russia away from China, the way Nixon did with China. The reverse Nixon, yes. Oh my God, light me on fire. But listen.
Have you heard about the reverse Nixon? Now they're going down that rabbit hole. Anyway, go on.
Wow, that sounds like a different kind of podcast, quite frankly. No, but listen, what I'm getting at here is, I think the reason this is happening is because the Office of the Net Assessments is seen as perpetuating an establishment, sort of neocon worldview. I'm sure that whoever made that decision has looked at some analyses, and I'm sure that a lot of net assessments coming out of the Office of Net Assessments are kind of neocon and have driven the United States of America into really silly paths. So, of course, any method, any process, any intellectual endeavor can be politicized and corrupted. So one of the reasons that I think you and I are not corrupted is because we work for hedge fund degenerates, quite frankly. If you're listening to this podcast, they're like, oh, these guys are finance pros. Yeah, we are. So the only thing we really care about is whether stocks are green or red. That's what I professionally do. And that makes me, quite frankly, objective in today's world, because everyone else is looking for a political or ideological red or green. I just look at it from a dollar sign perspective. So there, sue me. But what I'm getting at is this idea, like, well, because the Office of Net Assessments at Pentagon and because of their in-depth analysis has led us into some mistakes, many mistakes, we're just going to scrap this and we're going to bring in some dudes who make YouTube clips online. And that's a problem. And I think that's why this is happening. For those of you who are listening to this and you're just, not in like this space, like what is a net assessment? A net assessment is just a way to reach sort of a baseline view through data, through objectivity, and generally speaking, I would say top-down thinking. So you don't start from bottom up. You don't collect a bunch of information from sources and then think of it. You just kind of start big picture. The reason it's important is because it provides you with a filter through which to filter incoming information. And then when data confirms your net assessment, like for example, India is going to be a great power in the next 20 years, let's just say. Data comes in, proves that that's correct. You just don't do anything with it. When data comes in, it suggests that, maybe that's wrong. Maybe you do something, you change your view. That is just a way to have a baseline. And I think it's very important. And I think that the framework and the way to conduct a net assessment is, generally speaking, what you and I both do for a living. Now, maybe with variations. And of course, we still make mistakes. It's not a foolproof method. But just firing everyone who's been doing it for the past, 30 years is probably a mistake.
Well, it allows you for when you make the mistake to see where the mistake was and to course correct. And I think it's important to note, like the Office of Net Assessments was set up during the Nixon administration. And Nixon was really the only president, I don't know, in the last 100 years who thought the world was multipolar. And the art of net assessments is that you reach these big picture ideas about individual countries or individual actors. And then if there is a conflict, whether it's a military one or a trade one or anything else, you can net assess the strengths and weaknesses of both sides. And so if you've done that hard work and you say, hey, like we're trying to figure out what a trade deal with China would mean in the context of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. Okay, great. Take out the net assessments for the Soviet Union and China and the United States. Let's play them against each other. Let's see what sort of things develop. And one of the things I've sort of been circling on in my own sort of understanding of what's going on in the world right now with everything that Trump is throwing at us is that even though Marco Rubio said that the world is multipolar, I don't think the U.S. government thinks that. And I don't think Donald Trump thinks
that's
that.
A good one.
And I think that the world is multipolar. And I think that President Trump and his administration are governing as if they're an empire. And I think a lot of the friction that we are seeing in the world right now is these two things bumping up against each other. And I think the multipolarity is going to win sort of in the outset. But I think you can see this in everything from talking about annexing Canada to demanding that not just Ukraine, but that like Poland and other countries say thank you. Like just like incredible that we're demanding. Anyway, yeah, take it from there.
This is good. This is good because we're gonna disagree here a little bit. But like, first of all, I just find it hilarious that right off the bat, within like 10 minutes of this podcast, we've already revealed ourselves to be Nixon fans.
Oh, I'm not a Nixon fan. You're a Nixon fan? Oh, okay.
I'm a Nixon fan. No. Yeah, I'm a foreign policy Nixon fan. I think when it came to foreign policy, he was perhaps one of the best American presidents. Yeah. Now he was kind of wrong on multipolarity at the time. Although I understand why he had that view. He was post-Vietnam. In many ways, it looked pretty hairy for the U.S. At that point. So I understand that, yes. But we don't have to debate that. Let's debate the point that you made, which is that, first of all, what is multipolarity? Again, since our audience is broader, and I hope my mom is listening, multipolarity, for most Americans, is a Russian propaganda tool. And you and I are either CCP spies or useful idiots for the Kremlin. So, you're probably a CCP spy. And given that my Serbian origin, clearly I'm a useful idiot for Russia.
I'm actually deeply hurt that I've never been approached by anything resembling a Chinese Communist Party source to say, hey, can you say some nice things about China? Because maybe they know I'm already going to be objective anyway. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, listen, multipolarity here in the U.S. is like, oh my God. No, in fact, foreign affairs, like basically dedicated a whole publication just to this. And most of it was like, there were a few reports in it. It's a really good one. If you want to find out, go to the Foreign Affairs archives and pick up the whole copy of it. But I felt it was a lot of American academics and scholars and CFR members basically saying, no, we're still number one. So multipolarity means simply that no country or no two countries are powerful enough to carve up the world into either a unipolar, hegemonic, imperial, relationship or a bipolar world like the Cold War. And what most Americans get really nervous and anxious when they hear it is that it means that they're not number one, which is not what it means, though. You can still be head and shoulder most powerful country in the world. Absolutely. However, you're not head, shoulder, torso, and hips above everyone else. So you don't have this preponderance of power where you can pick up the phone, call the British Prime Minister and say, yo, I'm going to sell the pound and crash it if you and your buddies, Israel and France, don't withdraw from the Sinai. Boom, hashtag happened. Like that kind of like just awesome power. Like you're wreathed in awesome power, as Lincoln says in the movie, right? US is wreathed in awesome power in a unipolar world. It can do whatever it wants with a phone call. That's not where we are, and we haven't been there for like 10, 15 years. Jacob's point, your point, is Trump doesn't get that. He's acting more imperially. I would disagree, man. I would say that he's the first president who has recognized it. I think Obama probably came close to it as well in some ways. But I think that Trump does get that. It's just that he has front-loaded all of the sticks and hasn't really applied any of the carrots that I think a country needs to deploy in a multipolar environment. You can't just go around asking the rest of the world to pay for your tax cuts. Like, you could have, by the way, you should have done that in early 2000s. And if you're President Trump and you're a Trump supporter, hey, blame George W. Bush for not using America's unipolar moment to get, I guess, the rest of the world to pay for tax cuts in America. Like, fine. But in a multipolar world, that's going to be difficult. But some of his other behavior, though, Jacob, like, for example, understanding the U.S. commitments around the world have to be pared down. If, like, you can do that in a diplomatic way, of course. Maybe he's not doing that. But wouldn't you say that his intention in cutting down American involvement around the world is based on a view of multipolarity?
I don't think so. I'm open to the counterfactual of this, but let's just talk about a couple of the things that he's done since he got elected. The first thing he was talking about when he got to office was taking over the Panama Canal. He has threatened Canada how many different times now? Not just with tariffs, but with flat out annexation. Like, he seriously has his press secretary talking about how he just wants Canada to become the 51st state. I think it was Howard Lutnick went on, was it CNBC or something like that, and said the Canadians could get zero tariffs if they would just become part of the United States. He's on about Greenland all the time. He went over to the Europeans and said, y'all suck. I'm not paying for your defense anymore. And by the way, I'm going to call my friend Vladimir Putin, and we're just going to solve this Russia-Ukraine war by ourselves, because that's what I do. Like, we're the United States. And by the way, Zelensky, Poland, all of you need to say thank you for the things that we're doing. Otherwise, we're going to take the screws to you more. You think I'm lying? Boom. Here's 200% tariffs on your wine and 200% tariffs on all your other nonsense. China, by the way, here's some tariffs for you. And if you don't do what I'm going to say, we're going to raise the tariffs even more. And we're going to completely destroy you and all these other different things. So all of that, I think you're right in the sense that he wants to withdraw U.S. commitments to Europe. And he wants to focus U.S. foreign policy on the Asia-Pacific region because he sees China as the more pressing threat and the peer threat. But the tactics that he's using right now, they're not, like you said, they're not diplomatic at all. They're literally just, hey, we're the strongest power. This is what we said. Either go with us or you're against us. And he's gotten a lot of people to bend the knee. Look at the altercation with Colombia at the very beginning of the presidency, where he said, if you don't take these migrants, here's 25% tariffs for you. And they,
Panama too.
And they wilted, they wilted because they have to. They're in the Western Hemisphere. The United States is that much stronger.
But that's the key point that you just said. I think that he's been quite aggressive and quite, extremely aggressive towards the Western Hemisphere, and I think that's where I was going to take, like your point. You can have a very multipolar sense of the world, and then your conclusion is that regionalization is the way to play multipolarity. So many have kind of made fun of the Trump administration with memes of them playing a game of Risk. In Risk, you get extra troops if you control a particular continent, right? That's why I always try to get my Australia and South America to get those quick extra reinforcements. And in a way, I do agree with that. Like, in a multipolar world, it's really, really important to lock down, your own region. And so Panama, Canada, Greenland, again, I'm not saying that I would do it the same way. I'm just, from a simplistic YouTube informed perspective, you can still have a view of multipolarity and be super mean to the members of your hemisphere, where you're saying, like, listen, guys, we gotta like reassess some things. Monroe Doctrine has to be like reaffirmed. So I'm gonna shoot for the moon. I'm gonna tell the Canadians that I'm gonna annex them. But really, I'm not looking for that. I'm just looking for them to take me seriously. What I would say is, where I think, so I kind of disagree with you that is a sense of imperialism. It's a sense of regional imperialism, which is, consistent with the way you would play a multipolar world. My concern is that the assumption that you can extract rents from the rest of the world in a multipolar world, from everyone in the world, that's the part where I think the tactic is incorrect. So specifically, when you read some of the literature that Trump's advisors have written, like Stephen Miron, who I respect a lot, has written this 50-page report. You can download it online. I encourage everyone to read it. It is titled, what's it titled? Restructuring Global Trade for the 21st Century, something like that. It's a playbook for restructuring global trade, something like that. And he makes a case for double-digit across-the-board tariffs. And his argument starts off with an assumption that I think is going to be very difficult to take seriously in a multipolar world. And the assumption is that the rest of the world effectively owes America for its liberty. And the reserve currency status, which the US enjoys, is insufficient to pay for that liberty. Like, you have to pay more. But don't abandon the dollar as the reserve currency, please. But also give us 20%, so we can cut our taxes more, because you owe us. And in a multipolar world, I think where Trump administration is, again, I think watching too many YouTube clips to get this information about how the world works, there's no way that that's going to pass muster with most middle powers. Panama, sure, you can go in there, tell them, like, yo, like, you owe your independence to us. Like, let's not forget that. So those ports, they have to be sold. Fine. But when it comes to, like, going to Indonesia or Malaysia or Thailand, or, like Turkey or Saudi Arabia even, or Brazil, or many European countries, it's going to be very difficult to make that argument, because they don't owe their liberty to the United States of America in 2025. They just don't. There is no Soviet Union. And I think the problem with many American-based analysts is that they think everyone thinks of Russia and China the way they do. Mm-hmm. So, for example, what's the difference between China and Soviet Union? Soviet Union had a three-pronged threat on most of the world. Number one, it threatened them with conventional military, particularly in the US, where the tank divisions were. Sorry, not in the US, my fault, in Europe. That's where the war was going to be conventional. But then it also had an ideological threat that China doesn't have. I mean, there were communists, there were communist parties and or communist-aligned militants in almost every developing nation in the world that Soviet Union in some way, shape, or form supported. And then finally, there was international terrorism, actual terrorism, terrorists that the Soviet Union supported, whether they were left-wing or not, whether they were nationalists. The Soviet Union just went around the world looking for terrorists and being like, hey, you want some Kalashnikovs? Here's some money, So my point is, if you're Indonesia and a bunch of Americans show up in Jakarta and they're like, yo, you owe us for your freedom. And the Indonesians are like, what do you mean? Well, China. Indonesia's going to be like, what about China? Well, it's a threat. And it's like, okay, yeah, I mean, like, we do care about the South China Sea, and, like, we don't like some of their policies, but we also slapped tariffs on our export of nickel, and China showed up with $20 billion and built us a processing industry. So, it's kind of a mixed bag. And then the Americans go, well, what is your threat? You know what our threat is? Our threat is Filipino pirates. Well, that's kind of what we're dealing with right now. And we don't need your weapons. We certainly don't need F-35s to deal with that threat. Like, French Rafales are just good enough. So what I'm getting at is that I think I disagree with you. I think that they do believe the world is multipolar. They just don't know what that means in terms of how to behave. And if you go around the world expecting countries like Indonesia to pay for your tax cuts, boy, like, you're risking the collapse of few hegemonic pillars that are currently running on fumes, such as the reserve currency of the United States of America. So you risk a America sale of America Inc. by the rest of the world. It's just like, look, man, you don't have that power over us anymore. We don't owe your liberty to us. And so we're actually going to go invest somewhere else, including our safe haven assets. And I think this is a very, very scary thing that's happening right now in the market. I said I wasn't going to talk about the markets, but like some parts of global asset markets are hinting at kind of a potential yard sale on American exceptionalism and American hegemony. And I think that's a really, really risky move. I think that they are misunderstanding how to behave in a multipolar world. So maybe you and I disagree on whether they think it is or not, but I think we're in alignment that they don't know how to behave in a multipolar world. And the good news is that I think there's ways that they can be disciplined. You fly to Jakarta, you tell a bunch of Indonesians you owe us for your liberty. Jakarta, people in Jakarta laugh at your face. And you're like, oh, maybe they don't. Or you look at how the dollar has collapsed over the last 6 weeks, the way gold prices are going up, or the way the 10-year treasury yield is not reacting the way it should in a potential recession. Like those might like wake you up to the fact like, oh, I'm actually scoring multiple own calls.
Yeah, but one of the differences between the second Trump administration and the first Trump administration is that the market action we've seen already in the last couple of weeks, I think would have immediately chastened the first Trump administration. They're not chastened. Trump was out last Sunday saying, oh, it's going to be painful. Like, I can't focus on the markets. I have to focus on building a stronger country. And now you have all the conspiracy theories about how this is all some big plan to help Main Street by going after Wall Street and cutting Wall Street down to size and weakening the dollar. It's more of this reverse Nixon nonsense, except it's in the financial markets. I'm also struck by what you said about Indonesia, because if they go to Indonesia and do that, and they ask them, and if they have the temerity to ask, what is the threat that you're facing? Because I don't think they'll do that. I think that they, to your point, tactically are thinking like an empire, even if they conceptually have some grasp of multipolarity. But if they went and asked Indonesia the question, what is your biggest threat? Indonesia wouldn't say Filipino pirates. They would say, it's you, asshole. Can you stop with the tariffs? And can you stop messing up the rules of global trade, which we've all been working off of? The whole system, the reason people go along with the United States is because it was better for them to do so. And the more that the United States pushes here, the more it's really accelerating the development of this multipolar world. And whether it's because they know it's multipolar or not, I think the thing that they're doing is they're underestimating everybody. They're believing the nonsense that Germany is over, that they're deindustrializing. They're not going to be there. They're believing the nonsense. There'll never be a power in South America. We're going to party like it's the 1800s. Monroe Doctrine, we're just going to update it. Do whatever you want. All these other countries, they're going to be afraid of China, so we're going to do whatever we want. I don't know if you saw this week. This is a relatively unimportant thing, but if you want to know what multipolarity really looks like, it has nothing to do with China, Russia, the United States, even the European Union. You know who decided to upgrade their relationship to a strategic partnership this week? Vietnam and Indonesia.
Yeah, that's a good point. And by the way, that's 400 million people. Yeah. Boom. What's up? Mic drop. No, listen. Couple of things you said there, really, really interesting. First of all, I think it's unfair to say that Trump doesn't care about stocks or does care about stocks and so on. Let's not forget, in 2018, there was a trade war. Stocks went down. In 2018, S&P 500 ended about almost 5% down. So, so like, did he not care or care about stocks? Like, I think that Trump can chew gum and walk at the same time. Sorry if that like lights people on fire listening to this. I think he does. And I think that he will tweet about stocks when they're going up. There was like some bank produced research. By the way, this is what we do at Wall Street. This is literally what we do. We do an Excel spreadsheet of how many times he tweets about the market. And so there's an investment bank out there that literally paid someone a lot of money to do this. And the conclusion was like, oh my God, Trump hasn't tweeted about S&P 500. It's like, yeah, because it's going down. But if he goes up, he will tweet about it. Like, relax. And so in 2018, very important for people to remember, I don't accept the narrative that he's different. In 2018, he pursued a trade war with China. It caused stocks, amongst other things. There were other things going on in 2018, but S&P went down, and he pursued those policies nonetheless. He was only disciplined later in 2019. Only in 2019 did he conclude a phase one deal. So I would say, like, look, it's 45 days into his presidency. Is he going to be disciplined by the stock market and the economy? Yes, I actually think he will be eventually. but we can disagree on that. The bigger point I think that you're making is that many of the policies that they're pursuing will deepen a multipolar world where multiple countries think for themselves. So let me use my favorite example of this, which is kind of the extreme one. We're talking about Indonesia, Vietnam. I mean, your point about strategic partnership, Vietnam, Indonesia, I didn't know about that. That's awesome. A simple example is Canada. Canada, you can think of Canada as a milkshake.
Yeah.
And it's got a lot of really good stuff inside. And the United States of America right now has the only straw that goes into this milkshake. Like, that's just a fact, and it's amazing. And there's like a discount because of that on everything Canadian. And the Canadians for a very long time have been really, really silly with this, and they've refused to build other straws. In fact, the foreign minister of Canada, she was on, I think, CNN's show, and when talking about a pipeline to the Pacific, she was like almost like stuttering in not saying the word China. But effectively, you can build two other straws, one to Europe, one to Pacific, through British Columbia, and the other one through the St. Lawrence Seaway to Europe. And for various reasons, mainly I think misplaced environmentalism, Canada has refused to do that. Well, guess what? That's the number one issue now in the election campaign in Canada, that pretty much all parties agree that has to be built. And that's a great example of how you deepen multipolarity by just being hostile to other countries. In other words, I don't have a problem with President Trump's assessment that it's a multipolar world. I can understand why he wants to, move the chips around the table. All of that makes a lot of sense. But you got to have carrots and sticks. And right now, there's not a lot of carrots. The other thing I would say is, where does this perception come from that you can bully other countries, even the ones that are middle power? And I think it comes from something very important, which is the U.S. stock market, U.S. economy, U.S. innovation, U.S. technology has absolutely crushed the rest of the world for 15 years. And I think that President Trump is at risk of, basically extrapolating linearly what's happened over the last 15 years. Last 5 years of that 15, I would argue, was not genuine outperformance. And this is what I'm telling my clients as well. There's a bunch of charts and data here. But I think effectively, for those of you who are listening and are not in finance and not in economics, I'm going to keep it very simple. US looks shredded. I mean, shredded. It's like working out, like it looks like he works out 4 hours a day at the gym, just great tan, like no gray hair. It's like a dude in their mid-50s who's just like a walking model. Everybody else kind of looks like, they drink a beer once or twice a night. And the rest of the world is freaking out. They're just trying to structurally reform. But what they don't understand is that the U.S. has been taking Ozempic. For the last 5 years, U.S. has been taking massive amounts of weight loss drugs. Yep, that's it. And that's the fiscal policy. That's not Joe Biden's fault. It's not Donald Trump's fault. It's not Nancy Pelosi's fault. It's everybody's fault. The U.S. government spent as much fighting COVID as it did World War II. And that has seeped into outperformance, earnings, revenues, multiples. And so I think President Trump has fallen into the trap that most Americans have fallen into, and most investors around the world, which is that they think there's something special going on in the U.S. and it's going to continue. And so I think the reason they're acting the way they are, with as much sticks instead of carrots, is because they think that the rest of the world needs this awesomeness. And I think everyone's missing the big picture, which is that the awesomeness is a product of just a fiscal orgy, which is ending.
If that's true, Marko, then they really are stupid. Like, I don't think they're stupid. And if they think that, like, they are morons, because we don't actually make things in this country anymore. The way that the system works is that we design things and invent things, and it gets made in other places. And they're willy-nilly slapping tariffs on everywhere else. And there has not been an iota of discussion about how the U.S. government is going to support industrial policy to actually build these things in the United States again. Like, if they think there is some secret sauce, like, they're under a grave misapprehension.
Well, I think that they agree. Obviously, President Trump agrees with what you just said, which is like, we need to make these things inside. I think that they're overstating how important access to the U.S. market will be for a lot of other countries. That's my point. And they're overstating that based on like just the strength of the U.S. consumer over the last 5 years, which has clearly been the global source of growth. my point is just like, yes, it's been a global growth source, but that's because you and your friend Joe Biden have both spent a lot of fiscal. And so if that is now ending, a lot of the other countries are going to say like, look, man, it's just not worth it for me to pay that 20% tax so you can have tax cuts. Like, that's pretty mean to me. And look over there, Vietnam is 100 million people, Indonesia's 300 million, Thailand and so on. I think that's, and in terms of, saying that they're stupid, Jacob, this is the consensus view, as you know, in finance. The consensus view in financial markets until 6 weeks ago was that the US is absolutely going to continue to crush it. AI, ease of doing business, innovation, deep venture tech pool, all of this is what US has. Europe is the museum, China's uninvestable, BRICS, give me a chance, emerging markets. Oh, that's so early 2000s. And so I wouldn't say that the Trump administration is stupid. Everyone's kind of stupid. And everyone's like thinks that this gravy train in the US is going to continue. What I'm saying is this. I think America has a moment. Every country kind of has 5 to 10 years where it's in the sunlight. US has off and on been in that spotlight. This is the moment. I can agree why President Trump may want to use this moment, this particular moment, like of US being at the peak in terms of performance, to kind of reshape global trade, but he's got to be very careful in that all sticks and no carrots could lead to abandonment of US as a market. And by the way, one thing I will give him credit, and maybe you won't, but I will just say, like, look, it's day 45 of the presidency, and maybe he's leading with sticks and carrots are going to come down the line. And I think eventually he will be disciplined by both the market and reality of geopolitics. And he's going to have to tone down this idea that the rest of the world's going to pay for our like pretty petty tax cuts.
Yeah, I mean, he lionizes, especially William McKinley, but also just American foreign policy around that time period, which Teddy Roosevelt described as speak softly and carry a big stick. And to your point, all he's doing is waving sticks around and just, gesticulating very loudly. Like, there's none of the speak softly part. And yes, he's only on day 45, but according to him, it's the greatest 45 days in the history of the United States. George Washington comes in second with his first 45 days. So I want to take him a little bit as his word there. I also just wanted to say, when you're thinking about the fiscal, I agree, but I would put it starts way back in 08 with, the bailouts in 08 and not being willing to let capitalism work the way that it thinks it's going to work. I think part of the narrative here too of U.S. exceptionalism goes back to this idea that, nothing in China can be innovative because they're a communist party and we're a capitalist society. What we learned in 08 that like actually China might be more capitalist than the United States or than some of these other ones. But I want to take it back to Canada here because maybe you can help me with this. I'm really struggling with understanding what the policy is towards Canada. I've been saying this is all part of the USMCA renegotiation. He doesn't like Trudeau, so he'll get Trudeau to exit stage left with the political pressure that he's so wisely put on, and then he'll start the negotiation process. And by 2026, we'll be talking about how, wasn't he such a great negotiator, blah, blah, blah. By the way, fixing all the parts of the deal that he negotiated in the first term that weren't very good. But it's already turning away from that. So Mark Carney, new prime minister for Canada, his first visit is going to be to Europe. He's already announced that. It's probably going to be he's going to be in France, probably on Monday. You've got American products getting taken off the shelves in Canada. They're talking about only buying Canadian products. You've got Canadian politicians, screaming, who can say Canada first the most loudly? Like, yes, 80% of Canadian trade goes to the United States. And yes, it's going to be extremely painful if they want to try and actually move things. But you've literally got, people asking the White House press secretary, did he really mean he wants to annex Canada? And they're saying, yes, he wants to take it over. Like, he wants to revisit the border. Like, that, it's bonkers. Can you and your nihilism explain this? Because I'm starting to get to the point where, like, when I get asked this in front of an audience, I'm like, I don't really know. This doesn't make sense. Like, you don't want to pick a fight with Canada if you're also picking a fight with all these other people in the world. How do you explain it?
Well, I think, again, this is where I think President Trump does get some of his advisors to give him advice from YouTube clips, like straight up. That's what's happening. So that's first. Second of all, I don't think he has stable preferences. I just don't think so. I think that too many investors, too many of our clients, very sophisticated people who manage a lot of money, come in with the question of what does he want? And I think he doesn't really know. Many of his advisors, by the way, are everything from like, very far right sort of anti-establishment to establishment. And that just reflects the fact that he kind of feels his way through. He's like somebody who walks into a bar, definitely wants to go home with a partner, wants to get laid, but is kind of open to anything. He's going to feel his way through the night. That's what President Trump is doing. He's in a bar kind of looking around like, hey, I'm going to talk to this, that. That's what he's doing, which is perhaps a very appropriate analogy.
Yeah. I guess.
But listen.
But where does it end? Does it end with USMCA renegotiation? Does it end with the end of the USMCA? Like, where is it going?
No, I think one thing that game theory is a funny thing. Most people, when they try to assess who wins a fight in game theory, use material power as a way to gauge who's going to win.
Mm-hmm.
But its willingness to incur pain, its tolerance to pain that has to be added to material power. If material power was the only thing that mattered, the United States of America would have won the Vietnam War, as an obvious example. But it didn't. It had to effectively withdraw because tolerance for pain was much greater for the North Vietnam than it was for the U.S. So I think what they've kind of opened up is a can of worms there in Canada, because there is no way in hell that Canada's going to subvert its sovereignty. It's just not going to happen. And it was an unnecessary thing to bring up because it was an own goal by the Trump administration. If you want to renegotiate USMCA, or if you want Canada to pay some higher tariff, to contribute to the pot of paying for American tax cuts, if you want Canada to be in that pot, then maybe don't get them riled up, because what you've done is you've gotten to a point where the Canadians are cool with much higher unemployment and a recession. It's like, let's go. LFG, so, and that's my point. In a multipolar world, it's perfectly fine to renegotiate. I agree with the anti-establishment members of the Trump administration that say the U.S. should not follow neocon policy. Yeah, got it. It's not unipolar. But you cannot always lead with sticks. It's going to produce bad outcomes for you. And leading with we're going to annex Canada makes it very, very easy for Canada to increase its pain tolerance, because this is now about existential risk to Canada. It's not about price of goods in stores, or you being able to make money by selling goods to the United States.
Mm-hmm. The flip side of that too, we had a would you call it a soft CPI print this week? Softer than maybe I was expecting. The other thing about using the sticks in this way is that, theoretically, you're going to drive up prices. Because all of these different countries are going to have retaliatory tariffs, or supply chains are going to get messed up. And then it's going to be about the tolerance of the American voter. And, you already see polls that are suggesting that President Trump's support is declining. Is there any counterfactual case that you've come up with where you think that inflation is not going to go up? Because it seems to me, even if he doesn't mean all the things that he has said, even if he pulls back a little bit, that what he's already done should increase inflation markedly over the next couple of prints. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I can see a world where inflation goes down significantly because he causes a recession.
Mm-hmm.
So I call this the mess around and find out politics. Mess around with global trade, mess around with your allies, mess around with fiscal policy, mess around with a lot of different things, and you're going to find out. And so yes, I can see a world where inflation is definitely lower in 6 months, but it's not something that consumers are cheering, oh, egg prices have come down, but I don't have a job to buy these cheaper eggs with. So that's going to be great. You can definitely bring inflation down like that. Just cause a recession. One thing, though, that you mentioned is that's exactly where I was headed with this. If you're trying to have a trade war with Canada, and God bless you, that's cool. All right, he got elected, right? He's the president of the United States of America. Let's go. Let's see what that looks like. The problem is, if you increase their pain threshold, if you increase Canada's pain tolerance by needling them on sovereignty, you've lost. Exactly because of the thing you said, Jacob. How many Americans care about this issue? How many Americans want Canada to be annexed? And by the way, if you're a MAGA supporter and you do a modicum of research, and I mean a modicum, you do not want Canada to become part of the United States of America, because you're going to be dealing with a maple aftertaste in your mouth after you digest it for a very long time. you are not going to have a MAGA America First president ever. Unless you enslave Canadians, which I guess, like maybe that's the way to go. Maybe they would just become a territory.
Well, they did say that Canadians who have been here for more than 30 days have to register with local authorities from here on out. Did you see that? I saw people on Twitter with the memes of the maple leafs, like the Stars of David on their arms, except maple leafs. I mean, like crazy stuff.
Well, look. The point here is that nobody in America cares about this. They just don't. Like nobody walks around being like, you know what we need? Canada. Like that's not what's going on. And so again, the pain threshold for Americans, given that the median American doesn't want to annex Canada, the pain threshold for anything Canada imposes on the U.S. is very low, especially to the Midwest states that rely on Canada for energy. I mean, everyone's focused on Ontario Premier Ford, who's like, a pretty interesting dude, kind of like Trumpy, standing up saying we're going to cut off electricity exports. Ontario doesn't send that much electricity. If the far more francophone nationalist La Belle Province de Quebec decides to cut off its energy to the United States of America, and by the way, if the sweet, nice Ontario is considering it, let me just tell you, if Quebec ever shuts off energy to the United States of America, like good luck. We're going to be recording this podcast with freaking candles. And so my point is, again, U.S. doesn't have a pain threshold to fight a trade war with Canada at all. And this is where this very stupid, very simplistic game theorizing comes in. Who exports more to who? That's not the only thing that matters. Yes, Canada relies on America for all of its growth. Got it. But if it's about an existential risk for them, they're going to say, screw it, put on the maple leaf dynamite vest and blow it, as you were saying. And that's what's happening in Canada. I talked to a lot of Canadian clients, a lot of pension funds in there, a lot of really sophisticated investors, and nobody's really losing sleep over the fact that, they're going to go to a trade war with the U.S.
That actually,
it's like, let's go.
That's a callback to what we talked about at the very beginning, which is the point of net assessments was to avoid precisely what you're talking about, looking at a few simplistic statistics and saying, oh, export this, okay, we're going to win. It was about, no, all of these different layers, some quantitative, some qualitative, who's going to win in this conflict, how far can you push it? And we just learned that they're not even thinking about those sort of things anymore, to your point, learning from YouTube. Before we get to our fun segment at the very end, because I have to go in 20 minutes, we should spend 10 minutes talking about Europe, I think, just because the changes that are happening in Europe. I don't know if you feel this way. I feel like they're absolutely massive. Germany is not waking up, it's awake. Like debt break, gone. The Greens are now in on, like they agreed to whatever MERS wanted. The Constitutional Court said, go on through. Like that's all just happened in the last couple of days. I love listening to David McWilliams. I don't know if you listened to him. He on his podcast, I'm jealous of this take. He was like, he predicted that within 2 to 3 years, the UK would rejoin the European Union. I was like, damn, I wish I had said that. That one sounds really good. It's not, I mean, it's kind of out there. I don't think it's likely, but it's not crazy anymore. And then there's also, I think you were the only person who was out there saying this about, the United States is not going to turn its back on Ukraine. You said that on my podcast, 2 weeks ago? Lo and behold, the Ukrainians agreed to the ceasefire. The Russians are pussyfooting around, all that other stuff. So let's take 10 minutes and just talk about the view from Europe before we then turn to sports.
All right. So let's start with the last point, that U.S. is not going to turn its back on Ukraine. So this is where I got to say, we've bashed the tactics a lot of the Trump administration, a lot. Like we both agree that, this is not how you play a multipolar world. On the other hand, when it comes to Ukraine, it doesn't seem like the U.S. is abandoning either Ukraine or European defense. Is the rhetoric necessary? Probably not. But I think it's an important signal that maybe we should give the Trump administration, and not you and I, but like everybody, like it's day 45. And look, maybe Trump really likes sticks. He likes to use the big stick of the United States more than maybe Teddy Roosevelt did, but eventually he'll turn to carrots. And the biggest carrot to Ukraine is the rare earth mineral deal, which is complete and utter nonsense. And I just want to reestablish this to everyone listening to this. I said it on your podcast. If the United States of America gets a single nugget of rare earth out of Ukraine over the next 10 years, I will publicly eat a chart bag, my 80-page chart bag, in front of everyone. We'll do it on this podcast, and I'll give them 10 years. So hopefully we're doing this in 2035. I'll eat my chart bag if at any point over the next 10 years, the United States extracts rare earths out of Ukraine. So then, so on one hand, we can be glib and say President Trump is playing like Civ 4, and he thinks he needs a mine, somewhere. But I think that we should give him credit. He's doing Ukraine a favor. You got 30% of Americans who domestically, who are mainly Trump supporters, who really don't want him to support Ukraine. They've watched Tucker Carlson go to a Russian grocery store and smell the incredible bread, and they're like, oh my God, Russia's awesome. I wish we were more like Russia, you know? So there's like 30% of Americans who have that view. And President Trump is pulling them along to support a continued support of Ukraine due to a vacuous, non-existent deal. If you're liberal, progressive, or neocon, or you want U.S. to support Ukraine in the future, this is far more sustainable than anything Harris would have done. I know you're lighting yourself on fire right now. If you're a liberal, that's too bad. So like my view is this is a sustainable way for the U.S. to be engaged in Ukraine because Republicans, and in particular, those who are very on the far of the Republican Party, will now think that America got something, even though it's just a pound of flesh. So I think that this is where we have to kind of like really think about it, Jacob. Everything else we said on this podcast is like, you know, they're playing multipolarity wrong. I think it's fair to say that. I think, yes, but he has pivoted on a lot of his rhetoric. And if he can pivot on Zelensky rhetoric, and that was extreme, right? That the meeting was so extreme, why can't he pivot on the tariff rhetoric or annexation of Canada rhetoric? Now, we could also agree that that rhetoric alone will lead to hedging, will not be good for the U.S. over the long term. But all I'm saying is maybe this is a dude that just leads with sticks and it eventually goes to carrots. But he needs the sticks in a way to get domestic support for some of his quite establishment outcomes.
Yes, but I mean, to your point, the way that he did, like he could have done all that without waking up Europe. He basically made Europe, and maybe he doesn't mean this, maybe he's going to switch his rhetoric, but Europe's not coming back. Like Germany has decided that the United States is no longer an ally and that it has to go at it itself. France finally has them, doing that. The rest of the European Union is talking about doing things that are not going to be in U.S. interest. The U.S. fought 2 world wars to make sure that nobody could do the things that the Europeans are now talking about doing without like lifting a single finger. So like, I do think like Trump has a special skill, I think, for negotiating one-on-one with people and finding a person's weakness or finding the emotional center of an issue. But I think that he really underestimated Europe's strength and power. He thought they were just going to bend the knee with all this. And by doing what he's doing with Russia and Ukraine, okay, maybe he pulls them along, but he's created now a new pole in the world that wasn't there 6 weeks ago. And that's not going to go away just because he changes his rhetoric on tariffs in 3 months because he gets,
I agree with that.
The economic.
That's like the milkshake. Yeah, that's like the Canadian milkshake story. Like eventually he may find some middle ground, which will be quite coherent and modestly pro-American. But the problem is the Canadians probably will build those 2 other straws, and that will stay. That's piece of Canadian infrastructure now that's not in American interests, to basically share its energy wealth with the rest of the world. Before it was just America. In the European case, your point is they've woken up Europeans. Lord Ismay was like the first Secretary General of NATO, and he had this famous saying, NATO exists to keep the Americans in, the Russians out, and the Germans down. And so I think that this is where that YouTube watching comes in. I think there's this view in the far right MAGA world, which is largely acquired through YouTube watching. There's this view that somehow NATO is not in American interests, and it's an incredible like sort of story Americans have said to themselves. NATO is very much in American interests. I don't think Trump is going to abandon it. And it's in American interest because it's geographical anchor in Eurasia. That's maybe the neocon argument. But the other argument is that Europe is kind of without a geopolitical opinion. They like when you don't have the means, you don't have an opinion. And so for the most part, they can't really be at the big boy table with America, China, Russia, because they don't have the means to be at that table. And as you said, the part of Lord Ismay's quote, keep the Germans down, it's not a mean American like anti-German position. It's just like, hey, let's keep Europe in a permanent state of geopolitical adolescence. So anytime they need the family car, they got to ask us for keys. Like, yes, you can go take the car and meet your friends in Libya and take out Gaddafi. Here's the keys to the car. Go ahead, have fun, be safe, don't cause a migration. Oh no, what have you done? Right? Like that's like America being a dad. Like, oh, you took the minivan too far. You shouldn't have done that. Where's Gaddafi? Like, oh no, he's gone. Like, what did you do?
Yeah, I love the metaphor because now Volkswagen is coming out and saying they're going to use their factories to give them to Rheinmetall to make tanks and other things. So now they don't have to ask for it. So
that exactly. And now, on the other hand, it is what it is. And this is where what I would say is there's a lot of things going on, Jacob, that I think were going to happen anyways. Just there's a lot of things going on that whether Harris had won or Trump had won, it would have happened. And I had a view of Europe, even before everything that's happened, that Europe was going to get its act together. I think that Trump in some ways has just accelerated things that were going to happen anyways. And maybe we just kind of over-index to him as a catalyst. I'm just going to leave it there. I mean, that's a whole podcast itself. But I think there were trends going where Europe was going to kind of get its act together anyways. I mean, look, Joe Biden, was he really good for Europe? No, he was bad for Europe because he made him complacent. He allowed Nord Stream to get blown up. Not a conspiracy theory anymore. I mean, it's kind of, probably didn't do it, but kind of let the Ukrainians do it. My point is, if you're German, after 4 years of Joe Biden, if you're not spending more on defense and if you're not integrating more, then you're stupid, not the Americans. So I don't know. I think maybe we are also blaming Trump a little bit too much for some of the things that were going to happen anyway.
Some of them, but not some of the others. I mean, so you had Lord Ismay. I'll quote Polish President Donald Tusk last week. It's striking but true. Right now, 500 million Europeans are begging 300 million Americans for protection from 140 million Russians who have been unable to overcome 50 million Ukrainians for 3 years. And as a result of this, Mr. Tusk said, Poland should maybe have nuclear weapons. Every single man in Poland should be prepared for military combat, and the army should be increased to 500,000. And they're withdrawing from international agreements so that they can mine the border with Belarus. Those things we would not have Polish nukes and 500,000 angry Poles on winged horseback and all these other things, and cluster munitions and landmines and things like that on the border with Russia if Donald Trump had not pushed things in the street.
I don't know though, but listen to the quote itself, Jacob. It's very net assessment.
It is, isn't it?
To kind of tie it all together. Like, it's not net assessment-y, is it not? Let me tell you what would have happened with Harris, by the way. Vice President Harris becomes the president. Republicans in the House become fiscal conservative. Whoa! What a transformation! The Republicans in the Senate. She would have lost the Senate, by the way. That was locked in the math. So suddenly you have in America torn on the sidelines. The op-eds in European liberal progressive press are like, America is polarized, distant. Instead of like mean America, mean dad Trump, it's incompetent mom Harris. And boom, we have the same outcome. You see? Like, this is where I just, because what Tusk says in that is incredibly net assessment-y. He's saying 500 million Europeans relying on 300 million Americans to defend them from 120, 40 million Russians, depending on the data, who can't even beat 30 million Ukrainians. And I'm sitting here and listening, and I'm like, what does it matter that Trump exists? It's like, hey, that's a great point that he's making, regardless of who's the president of the United States of America. Like, maybe the 500 million Europeans should just increase their own capabilities on every level and not rely on 300 million, somewhat fickle Americans.
I think the difference is that Europe would have remained an adolescent under a Harris presidency and would have been subordinate to U.S. interests, and that's not going to be the case anymore. Yeah, I think that's the big.
I don't know.
And I think that would have happened. Certainly, if Europe overcame its adolescence, it would not have happened in the next during her presidency. Like, it would have been something.
So maybe that is the difference. Yeah, that's the speed with which it's happening. Trump is just making things happen faster, which is why you and I have not slept in 7 weeks.
Also, because I have a 4-month-old. But let's close out with our 8 minutes, and we'll pick it up here next time. You said you wanted to talk about 10 moments where geopolitics and sports intertwined. I don't know if we're going to get to 10, but I did some research on this. I'm curious where you're going to take this. So, top 10 geopolitical sports moments. What do you think?
Why don't we lead with this next time?
You want to lead with it next time?
I just think, yeah. So let's just leave a teaser.
Great.
We're gonna have so obviously I'm a nihilist. I'm bathed in aloof indifference. but my Lord and Savior is Bill Simmons. Obviously,
I'm more
that's
as
who
you
I
might
worship.
expect. I'm more of a Russillo guy, but yeah.
There you go. Yes, and this is why I think we jive so well. So this, for those of you, for the moms listening to this podcast, it's a silly little bro sports podcast called the Bill Simmons Pod, which of course is amazing. What's interesting, I'm a huge Laker fan. I still love him, even though he hates the Lakers. The reason I say that is that he has this gimmick, right? First of all, the Geopolitical Cousins is an ode to Bill Simmons, obviously, already. And then the other thing is that he does drafts, right? So he does drafts where he and his counterpart basically try to draft a team of anything. Like, it might be the most interesting analogies between TV and basketball. So you and I, for next segment, for next week, we're going to basically do it and like a draft. You pick first, I pick second, and then we put together a team of moments. Moments. It's got to be a moment.
Yeah.
A moment in sporting history that had a geopolitical consequence of note.
How many
of importance.
So we'll save the actual selections for next time, but I'm curious in the background research that you did.
Don't mention any.
I won't mention any. I'm just curious how many on your board that you had were before the year 1850. Were any?
None.
None. Okay. I was really stretching to try and find, because it seems to be like a 20th century thing, but
so first of all, yeah, of course it will be. If you find some, that's deep research.
I had one or two, but I was like really pushing the boundary between moment and like whatever else. So,
well, look, I will say something. I think obviously we're gonna age ourselves in this. I think 80s and 90s are gonna be very prevalent. But I think
30s,
it's also nice
the
as a
60s. Like, there's some good stuff.
No, well, I mean, yeah, I found some, but like I just know the ones that I'm going to draft first, are probably going to be 80s and 90s. But one thing I will say is, what we want to do is we want to emphasize not on those that are well known necessarily, but we want to emphasize those that actually had the largest geopolitical impact. So if we were going to, when we decide who has a better team, I think the way we do that is like whether our team members, our draft picks, were profound geopolitical.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then there's the teaser for the listeners, and we will pick it up next time.
And by the way, if you want to tweet at us, if anyone wants to tweet at us some potential draft picks, like here's what I will say. We've got a lot of fans on Twitter, obviously, on X. I'm sorry, Elon. I love you.
I don't love you.
Just don't ban us. Don't ban us on X because we said a few naughty things about Papa Trump. But what I want to say is, if our listeners want to give us some hints, try to, they're fans, they can ask us to draft Darko over Carmelo. You can do that. If you want to do that, send us some of your picks to us on X. So
yeah, or you can email. I'll throw an email address out there. If you want to email them, I'll make sure that Marko reads them too. Jacob@jacobshapiro.com. I will make sure that we'll use that one for any of the inbound stuff that people want to suggest.
Cool. Yeah. Awesome. He's not going to let me read it. He's going to be mean like America, and he's going to not share his intelligence anymore with me.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we're expelling you from the Five Eyes. What was Yugoslavia doing in the Five Eyes anyway? I don't know what you're talking about.
We were never in the Five Eyes.
I know. All right, Marko, we'll leave it there.
Awesome.